disciplined and transformed by the law. During one school holiday, 11-year-old Alan found himself accompanying his mother to her friend's house. Normally, he stayed home, but this time there was no one to look after him. As soon as they arrived, the two women got busy chatting, leaving Alan to head upstairs and join the friends' daughters, Emma and Jane. Emma was a year older than Alan and liked to take charge, while Jane, a bit younger, happily played along with whatever game her sister created. That day, they were deep into a pretend game, where Emma led a gang of criminals. The room had been turned into their imaginary world. Beds became hideouts, and the lower bunk doubled as a jail for captured gang members. Alan was quickly pulled into the game as Emma's right-hand man. It wasn't his usual kind of fun. He preferred action-packed games like cowboys or soldiers, but it beat sitting around doing nothing. After a few rounds of pretend robberies, Emma decided their gang needed better disguises. She rummaged through a dress-up box and tossed Alan a tartan skirt and a frilly blouse, declaring he would go undercover as part of their next mission. Alan hesitated. He didn't feel comfortable wearing those clothes and tried to argue, but Emma, firmly in her role as leader, insisted. She explained that Scottish men wore kilts and that this was part of the disguise. Reluctantly, and not wanting to be left out of the game, Alan gave in. Soon, he was dressed in the outfit, still unsure but trying to go along with the story. The game continued, and Alan carried out his role, pretending to sneak into a bank and steal money before escaping back to their hideout. Just as he thought he'd made it, Jane announced that the police were onto him. In the rush to hide the evidence, Emma tossed Alan's regular clothes out the window into the garden. Before he could react, Jane, playing the role of a determined police officer, captured him and tied his wrists behind his back with a ribbon, declaring him under arrest. Meanwhile, Emma and the rest of the gang hid successfully, leaving Alan to face the consequences of the imaginary crime, still dressed in his unusual disguise. While Alan sat imprisoned, Emma and the rest of the pretend gang were busy planning a daring rescue. Meanwhile, Jane fully embraced her role as the police officer, pacing around and questioning her captive. "So you thought you could fool everyone by dressing up and robbing the bank," she said sternly. "I wasn't pretending to be a girl," Alan replied quickly, trying to stay in character. "I was pretending to be Scottish." Jane smirked. "Nice try. But your disguise didn't work. Sergeant Teddy Bear, and I caught you hiding the money. Now admit it. You did it." "No, I didn't," Alan protested. "I was just trying to put money into the bank." That's not what the evidence says," Jane declared. 10 years in prison for being naughty. Take him away." She dragged him over to the bunk bed, pushing him onto the lower bunk that served as the cell. With his wrists tied behind him, Alan struggled awkwardly, trying to sit properly. Jane suddenly picked something up from the floor and held it out. "Don't even think about escaping, or I'll make you deal with this spider." Alan froze. He was terrified of spiders. Letting out a sharp scream, he scrambled away as best he could, despite his tied hands. Jane chased him playfully, laughing, while Emma doubled over with laughter. "You screamed like a little kid," Emma teased. "I did not," Alan snapped, his face burning with embarrassment, especially now that he was aware of how he looked. After a while, the teasing died down, and the game resumed. Alan's wrists were retied, this time to the bunk bed post, while Jane pretended to fill out paperwork and chat with Sergeant Teddy Bear about catching the rest of the gang. Meanwhile, Emma quietly prepared her rescue plan. She changed into a disguise and entered the prison pretending to be someone harmless. Once Jane's attention drifted, Emma leaned in and whispered, "I'm here to rescue you." "Untie me quickly," Alan whispered back, eager to be free. "Not yet," Emma replied. "We need a better disguise so you can escape without being recognized." Using playful, over-the-top logic, Emma insisted that the only way for him to get out unnoticed was to change his appearance again. Alan protested, but being tied up, he had little say in the matter. Soon, Emma had transformed him into a completely different character for the game. By the time she finished, Alan felt incredibly awkward and self-conscious, especially knowing he couldn't easily undo anything himself. When Jane returned, Emma explained that the criminal had been replaced. After a bit of playful questioning, Jane finally agreed that this new character couldn't possibly be the same person and released him. For the next half hour, Alan had no choice but to stay in character as the game continued. Sitting there, he eventually caught a glimpse of himself in the mirror. The sight made him pause. His appearance was so different from what he was used to that it left him feeling both surprised and uneasy. As the game went on, he couldn't help but feel a mix of embarrassment and disbelief at how the day had turned out. As Alan grew older, he had started to notice that some of the girls he liked seemed to admire longer hair, so he had let his own grow out a bit. Now, seeing it tied into two bunches with bright pink ribbons, he was surprised at how different, almost delicate, it made him look. Even more confusing was the fact that, in a strange way, he didn't completely dislike it. He sat there, conflicted. The soft fabric of the satin dress felt oddly pleasant, yet at the same time, he couldn't ignore how uncomfortable he was being dressed this way against his will. Jane soon returned to her role, bringing over one of her toys and making it speak. "Hello, princess. What's your name?" she said in a playful voice. "I'm Alan. No, wait, Princess Allison." He corrected himself awkwardly, his face turning red. Jane narrowed her eyes. "Alan? I thought you were a princess." "I am," he insisted, stumbling over his words. "Princess Allison." Even as he said it, he couldn't believe he was playing along. But Jane wasn't convinced. "I think you're the criminal pretending to be a princess," she declared. "No, I'm real," Alan said quickly, trying to stay in character despite his embarrassment. After more teasing questions, Alan struggled to respond, growing more flustered by the second. That hesitation was all Jane needed. "Aha, you're definitely the criminal," she announced triumphantly. "Back to prison." Before he knew it, Alan was tied up again, this time still dressed in the pink outfit, ribbons in his hair. Jane laughed and declared a new punishment, and soon both girls were laughing as they continued their playful antics, while Alan protested and tried to squirm free. Just then, there was a knock on the door. "All right, girls, wrap up your game," came a voice from downstairs. "Alan will be leaving soon." The girls paused immediately. Alan shifted awkwardly, trying to straighten himself out as best he could. Jane hurried off to fetch his clothes while Emma quickly untied him and began helping him out of the outfit. Moments later, his clothes were tossed onto the bed. As Alan reached for them, he noticed something crawling on his underpants, a spider from the garden. Startled, he yelped and flung them away again, sending them back out the window. The girls burst into laughter and refused to retrieve them, leaving Alan with little choice but to get dressed without them. Once he had changed back into his jeans and t-shirt, he headed downstairs, but then realized he still had the ribbons in his hair. Quickly, he pulled them out and left them behind before continuing. At the bottom of the stairs, his mother was already waiting, coat on, and ready to leave. "Come on, Alan," she said, heading toward the door. "Wait a second, Mum," he started, glancing toward the back of the house, but she stopped him. "No time now. You can come back another day." With no chance to explain, Alan said his goodbyes and followed her out. As they drove home, his mother gave him a curious look. "Were you playing dress-up?" she asked. Alan flushed, memories of the day rushing back. The outfit, the ribbons, everything. "Yeah," he admitted quietly. "I thought so," she said with a small smile. "You might want to wash your face when we get home. You seem to still have some lipstick on." Alan sank back into his seat, wishing the ground would swallow him as the car continued down the road.